Words are bridges.
शब्द सेतु हैं।
अल्फाज दिलों को और इंसानियत को जोड़ने का एक अजीम और तरीन पुल है।
വാക്കുകൾ പാലങ്ങളാണ്.
लफ्ज़ सरी कदलदारान
आखर हमार मेल सन आखर हमार जोड़
শব্দই সমন্বয়ৰ হেতু
Cocktail rock, yakraise.
Thuhih inkung kaina siam tu ani.
Ajrahana apati disale.
Grauthaining yaukrai.
Shabda setu hon.
शब्दां दी सांस।
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of our festival co-directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, festival producer Sonjoy K. Roy, and all of us at Teamwork Arts, I welcome you back for another exciting session of Jaipur Literature Festival's Words Are Bridges. As always, through this session, we will take you on multilingual journeys, celebrating the richness and diversity of Indian languages through translations. Our session today is Off the Beaten Track, the story of my unconventional life. Shahana Raza in conversation with Urbashi Bhutalia. Saida Bano's Off the Beaten Track, the story of my unconventional life, is translated from Urdu into English by her granddaughter Shahana Raza. It opens a window into the life and undying spirit of a doyen of Urdu broadcasting and India's first woman radio newsreader. In a conversation with writer and publisher Urbashi Bhutalia, Raza gives us a glimpse of Saida's determination and independence and courage, which provides a unique and crucial disruption in India's understanding of the past. Shahana Raza is a published journalist and an experienced writer. She has had the opportunity to work in television, radio, as well as print media. She has also penned a non-fiction piece for the anthology Feast on Your Life, which will be published in 2021 through Speaking Tiger. Urvashi Bhutalia is a feminist writer and publisher. She co-founded Kali for Women, India's first feminist publishing house, and when Kali closed down in 2003, she set up Zuban, a feminist publishing house of which she is now director. She has a long involvement in the women's movement in India and writes and publishes widely on issues related to women and gender. Her best-known published work is the award-winning History of Partition, titled The Other Side of Silence, Voices from the Partition of India. She's currently completing a new non-fiction work on the life of a trans woman. Before we move on to our session, we'd request you all to follow us on our handles JLF Litfest on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and to get notified on the upcoming sessions. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, and on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest. We now present Off the Beaten Track, the story of my unconventional life. Shahana Raza in conversation with Urvashi Bhutalia.
Hi Shahana, and welcome to this discussion hosted by JLF, Words Are Bridges. Great to see you here. And first of all, congratulations to you, to us, on the publication of your wonderful book, your grandmother's memoir, Off the Beaten Track, which in Urdu is called Dagar Se Hatkar, right?
Ji.
So, as you know, I'm delighted to be the publisher along with Penguin Random House of this book, and I have been on the trail of this book for almost 20 years. And I know that the family held off the publication, the translation and publication in English, but finally you did decide to translate it. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the book, your grandmother's story, and why you particularly chose to translate it?
Thank you, Urvashi. I'm really glad that you guys kind of went ahead with this. I think it was in my mind for 20 odd years, but one didn't have the courage or actually at that time even the space to think about it. But how it came about was that when my grandmother wrote the Urdu book, she soon after had a stroke. And when a little bit of buzz around the book started happening, she was apprehensive because there was a little bit of, it's a bit too frank, for a certain generation or some people. She's spoken quite candidly about a lot of topics that, didn't sit well for a bit. So, and she and I had quite a fiery relationship. So we used to make up also, and every time we had to make up, we used to land up in India International Center to eat. That was our, make up with each other. And she kind of told me, she said, why don't you translate this book? And perhaps if people read it in English, or they would understand that I've not written, maybe they don't get the language. Nobody knew, everybody knew about my life as is. So I remember turning around and telling her, but you've written it in Urdu, and I don't read Urdu. I mean, I am from Lucknow, I speak Urdu, I understand Urdu, but of course the vocabulary she used in the book stumped me when I started the translation. And then, I was on my way to America. I was going there to work, etc. And there was this, I used to go visit her every day, read her mail, and she'd had her stroke, so she was paralyzed on the left. And one fine day, just before I left, these 8 audio tapes, analog audio tapes, were handed to me. And, her friend just read out the entire book for me so that I would translate it. And I felt bad that the tapes went with me, but I didn't do anything about it for a very, very long time because, I was just so absorbed in my own life and settling in, etc. And in between, she passed away. And then, of course, I got married. I had my kids. I lost my mother. I went through some sort of undiagnosed depression, probably. And it wasn't, in between, I did pick up the tapes and I started hearing them and I started writing it out in Hindi. And it was difficult with rewind and forward, and a lot of the words would get chewed up, and I was very overwhelmed with the vocabulary. I was like, there's no way I can do this. I caught hold of my sister-in-law, and she said, I'll find you somebody who's very good in Urdu. And you won't believe this, but we printed the book, gave her a copy. She takes it with her back to Jamshedpur, and that guy's diagnosed with cancer. So she called me from there and she said, I don't have the time for me to give this to him. So I said, okay, just let it be. In between, my uncle passed away, and she just had 2 sons, my uncle and my dad. And suddenly I felt like, oh God, there's this urgency, like there are key people who, in the family who should have known, who she kind of trusted me to do this with, who, may not be there tomorrow. So I told my dad, I said, I just wish, maybe you can hear the tapes. And he said, but if she told you have the book, and she gave me a book, she's written the thing for me. And I said, yeah. So he said, get somebody to read it. So I said, yeah, why didn't I think of that? So I got the entire book, I transcribed it. I sat with her, I found this lady who read the entire book, and there were words that stumped her, and it was strange, but her father had given her this extremely large lughat, which is the Urdu dictionary, and every possible word, every phrase, every like that pule se raat, and the meanings and the connotations were all in that. So she kind of helped me write them all in English. And then, of course, there were many layers of translating. It couldn't just be one, but I did it. This is the way I did it. Yeah.
So that's quite a story of how you arrived at a translation. And I know that you feel quite strongly about the whole act of translating. But what you've done is fairly unconventional. It's not, many people would not translate from the spoken word or without actually being able to read the language. And I know that you sent me a piece on Rumi, which talks about how Rumi has been mistranslated by the West and sanitized into something other than he was. So can you talk a little bit about how translation is so important to you and why? Okay, so see, I just feel that if
when I began this process, I did the first translation I did, I felt it was so basic. I wasn't happy with it. And then you have to get into the skin of what those words actually mean in so many ways. They're different hues of the same thing. And to understand all of that took a lot of time. I mean, this thing, maybe other translators can do it in a year or something. It took me 3.5. But I actually went at it layer after layer. And I feel it's important to culturally understand that, how can I put it? It's important to culturally understand where she came from. Like, it's not enough that you just read the language, because sometimes I feel you take it for granted that the other person's assumed something and you write it. But perhaps because I came with a disadvantage of not reading Urdu, I put in more effort at trying to get all those little bits that were very important to me, like the gharara and the salams and along with her personality. I mean, I think there were things that she said, I could imagine her saying them. I could get the tone. But coming back to the translation bit, a lot of Lucknow, a lot of the kind of, because she was culturally a Muslim, she wasn't really a very practicing Muslim. So understanding that, understanding the social strata she came from, those sort of things, I think, went into this, translating this book.
Hey, Shahana, so we've talked about the language. Let's talk about her life. She was a fairly unusual woman, and I wonder if you can tell us just very briefly about her unusual life, and then read a couple of passages about her childhood, where you see the rebellious streak coming out, and you see how she's becoming the woman that she became. So, what's that?
She was not this murabba achar type of grandmother who oiled our hair and who we could play with their hair. And my nani was like that, but Bibi was always a little intimidating. She was extremely affectionate, but she would also just kind of, rap you on the knuckles if you got a pronunciation wrong. And, so to begin with, there was always that bit. And she drove, and she was, if you saw her in a party, she was the life of a party. She would be sitting there and quoting Shero Shairi and talking in extremely good English. And she, she commanded a certain presence, that, as you grew older, you realize it was quite, we enjoyed it. She was fun. She was witty. She was extremely humorous. She would tick us off for anything. And then we would fight. And she had the most crazy way of making it up to you, which I think was the whole beauty of how she was, that she could tick people off, and then she would just make it up to them in her own very bizarre way. But no, she was not your conventional grandmother from day one. Even, I mean, like I've mentioned earlier, we were amazed at all the clothes she wore, because her saris were always tied the other way around. And we used to tell her, why do you do this? And she's like, my sister, when I was a kid, she used to, because her sister was 12 years older to her. So she used to kind of tie the sari on her all ulta pulta. And, she kind of just stuck with it. So her pallu used to be on the other side.
So do you want to read those two short
passages?
Yes.
Yes. And I think the passages that I'm going to read right now are when she has just got married. Because if you go through the book, you will realize that she is a product of she was born and brought up in Bhopal, which was ruled by women. So she was quite empowered in that sense. And she gets married and comes to Lucknow, which is steeped in patriarchal, norms and values. So this is a passage which is, I think, right after her marriage. And she says, in my day-to-day behavior, I was demure and respectful. I behaved with everyone in a proper fashion. That outspoken, playful girl who chattered nonsensically, laughed uncontrollably for no apparent reason, and indulged in silly antics with friends had simply vanished. The only time I felt like my old jovial, happy-go-lucky self was when I spent time with Akila. In fact, my behavior often reminded me of these lines by Mirza Ghalib. फिर वज़ाए एहतियात से रुकने लगा है दम. I'm so consumed with the anxiety of being discreet, I feel suffocated.
So,
and then she, in another later part, she talks about, you know, how she was married off and how her father referred to her. She says, "My father-in-law was a worldly wise man. He felt he could brighten the light of his house with the sparkle I had in my character. He was always friendly and affectionate towards me and appreciated who I was as a person. Perhaps if he had lived a few more years, his positive influence would have brought some degree of balance to the emotional upheavals Abban and I witnessed in our marriage. Then perhaps my story would not have been what I'm writing now. At the time of my proposal, my father told Justice Raza, 'Raza Sahab, I want to tell you, my daughter is a chingari, a spark.' Raza Sahab promptly replied, 'Don't worry, Majid Hussain Sahab. My son is also an angara, a red hot coal.' I did not see myself as a spark, nor did Abban see himself as a burning coal. His oversensitive nature seared his personality, and as for me, I wasn't that fierce a flame that my intensity could not be tamed. A spark does, after all, get extinguished."
but actually, this spark didn't get extinguished, because that's the part of her life where she lives up to all the things that are expected of her. But then, of course, the marriage breaks up, and then she sets out to make her own life, which is really as more or less as a single woman for a long time. And then he moves to Delhi and gets, caught in partition violence. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that part of her life?
I'll read the part that we have selected here about when she arrives in Delhi, because I think she says it best in her own words. In the previous part where she says a spark does after all get extinguished, I think she meant her role as a wife. That got extinguished, which I don't think she expected it to go that way, but it happened, and she just picked herself up and moved on, as you said. So when she arrives in Delhi, and this is what is in her book, "I arrived in Delhi during the most tumultuous time in our history on the 10th of August in 1947. After 200 years of colonial rule, India stood expectantly poised to celebrate its first Independence Day on 15th August 1947, after being irrevocably split into two autonomous dominions, Hindustan and Pakistan. Breaking through the chains of an extremely conventional and secure life, I had chosen to live the vulnerable existence of a single woman. Age was on my side. I was young and strong. The pressing demands of circumstances and the voice of my own conscience had compelled me to find my courage. Overlooking all the gossip doing the rounds within the family, ignoring the criticism of society, and forsaking the comfortable life of Lucknow, I broke bonds and ventured out all alone, putting my life on the line. For a woman to walk out like this, alone, without any male support or approval, back in our days, leaving behind the safety and protection of home and family, was absolutely unheard of. So yeah, that part of her life, we also kind of got to know it in little phases. I think the first bit that we did know when we kind of were in our teens was that she was involved with somebody, and that this was not just your grandfather, because he had passed away and whatever. So, all of us knew about Nurudeen Ahmed. We knew that she was involved and what his commitment to her was, but nobody really spoke about it. There was a certain silent dignity that was kind of given to her, even amongst us. I don't think it was a point of conversation because she treated it quite normally. I mean, if she had hushed it up or she had pretended it wasn't there or she had kind of keep it under wraps, we would have possibly gossiped about it. But that was not there. Everybody knew about it. Who knew her knew that there was somebody in her life and that it was a relationship that was not accepted by his family or by society. And yet we accepted it because, I mean, not that there was a choice given, and nor was she hiding it. It was just there. And there's a passage in the book which I will read, where she talks about when he passes away and her feelings at that time.
Before you do that, For listeners who may not have known, so Nurudeen Ahmed was the mayor of Delhi, and 3 times elected mayor of Delhi, right? And the relationship, why the relationship was not a sanctioned one, was because he was married. He was a married man, and this was the most amazing love story because they met each other every day for 25 years. Later they married. I mean, why am I telling the story? Maybe you want to tell it. Shahana, it's yours.
Yes. She didn't kind of, like I said, hide what her relationship with him was. Neither did she kind of bring it up as a point of conversation. I think she kept it in a very strange emotional space because she wanted some sort of dignity, knowing that he was married, he had children, and how attached he was to his family. I mean, repeatedly through the book, she keeps saying he's extremely attached to his family. I think there was always a sense of guilt that she was part of his life, but she keeps saying it was my destiny. There's no way I could not have been part of it, the way it played out. And if you read the book, you realize that she made attempts to kind of withdraw and leave and all that, but none of it really worked. I think there was a sort of commitment from both sides. Neither could he extricate himself and neither could she walk out of it. So we all just accepted it. Of course, he also passed away way before, I mean, I got to know him or anything, but we all, like I said, knew about it in the family, and we let her have her, dignity with it. I mean, there's no point in us trying to make somebody who feels wrong or bad about something that's already there, because she wasn't hiding it.
Shahana, let's backtrack a little bit. In her life, after she came to Delhi, there were 2 very significant things. I mean, the Nurudeen relationship apart, one of them was the involvement in partition when she lost for a day your father, who was lost in one of the refugee camps. And her relationship with both her sons at that time was really close, and she brought them up, and she felt the loss of, she felt the sense of not being able to be the mother that she would have liked to have been. And the other thing is her work in All India Radio as a first woman announcer, where she was there at significant moments like partition, Gandhi's assassination, and also went on to become the first in charge of Urdu programs, reaching out to people in Pakistan. So if you could tell us a little bit about those involvements also.
Sure. As a mother, I think she constantly felt that she could have done more. Firstly, that whole episode where she loses my dad in that refugee camp is, it's a very interesting read, because she's just come in that film also with Amitabh Bachchan. She's Farrukh Jafar, probably, yeah. But I met her in Lucknow when I started doing the translation. I wanted to meet her. She's still alive, and she was BB's junior. She used to do some of the announcing later in that Urdu program. And she told me a very interesting thing. She said, most of the programming that we did was just the 3 of them. There was the assistant, there was Farooq Appa, and there was Bibi. And she says, your grandmother used to get food cooked and bring it in her car. And she used to put it there, and we would write the script, and we would read, and then we would eat, and then we would everything, because we didn't know if we would have a break or if we would have time to eat, and keep it in her car. So, that is something that I have heard from somebody else about how she was as a producer during that Urdu program that we did. Apart from that, somebody else told me that they remember their father talking about announcer called Saida Bano, and I don't know if this is true or not, but they said before she used to read the news, because AIR wanted to make sure that the readers found out that it's a lady, there used to be the sound of bangles. So Yeah, there would be this little sound of bangles, and then she used to introduce herself and say, I'm Saida Bano and I'm going to read the Urdu news for you, whatever. So this was their way of differentiating that it's not a male reader and it's a female reader. So
I wonder what they did for the
that's
male
something
reader to announce that it was going to be a male reader. That I suppose they didn't feel the need to announce.
Oh, they have to make no announcements. We have to say we are, if we are introduced into that sacred realm.
You know, you have that lovely passage when she leaves Asad, the older son, at boarding school and comes away because she can't look after both of them. Would you like to read that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was one of the things that made me choke because I suppose I'm a mother now and I kind of relate to it now. By mid-March 1947, I went to Nainital with Asad and admitted him in Sherwood. Along with the principal, I met his teachers and matrons, walked around the dormitory with him, helped organize his personal items, settled him into boarding. When I was leaving, Asad walked with me till the school gate. I put my arms around him and said, Khuda Hafiz, goodbye. He didn't cry, neither did I. The only thing I remember saying is, Bete, I'll come tomorrow evening to see you. Walking down the slope of the curved road outside the front gate of the school. I walked some 20 or 25 steps and turned around. Asad was standing by the gate looking in my direction. I walked a bit further till I reached a bend from where the gate of the school was not visible anymore. I took a few steps back and looked. My son was still standing in the exact same spot where I had left him. Till today, this image is etched deep in my mind. What must Asad have been going through? What must I have felt as I moved further and further away from my own child, holding on to my suppressed emotions? There are no words with which I can explain the pain I was experiencing.
That's a really beautiful passage. And she talks again and again in the book about how she feels torn as a mother, and it's a dilemma that I think many women face today when they're trying to lead a public life and also hold the strings of the domestic together. But she brings it together really nicely in the book. I mean, I don't know what you felt as a reader looking at that, because I suppose yours is more of an insider's view, but looking at it from the outside, that's what I felt.
Yeah, there seems to be this constant, feeling like she didn't do the best she could for her sons, and yet she did what she could given the circumstances. And she says it, but she's not trying to make an excuse or give some sort of a patchy, she doesn't want to kind of make this little apology for herself. There are even passages where she says, I don't know how I had the courage to tell my son that I was involved with somebody.
And she did tell.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So she says, I don't know how it was, but I just kind of said it. And if you knew Bibi, it was pretty much like that. If she wanted to say something, she would just say it. Whether it would offend you, it would make you happy, it would not. It would probably have been rattling inside her for a long time. So she would then just say it, So, yeah.
So also, Shahana, talk a little bit about the friendships. So I think I told you that at the time that I was working on this book, I was working on another book, a memoir of Anis Kidwai's. And I discovered through reading your grandmother's book that these two women who were so key in different public spaces, Anis Kidwai in working with abducted women after partition, and your grandmother being the radio announcer in All India Radio and being the public woman that she was. And they actually became good friends.
I have read about her relationship and friendship with Begum Anis Kidwai only through the book. I was not there to witness it, but I have witnessed her friendship with Begum Bhupal, and how deep it was, how close they were, how despite them being contemporaries and friends, she also maintained the protocol that was expected of her because her father was the teacher in Begum Bhupal's grandmother's court. So she had, she always maintained that, whether it was how she did the salam or how she greeted her or how when she came, what was the atmosphere in the house, etc. I have, memories of that. But yeah, all her friendships, all her, I remember once she called me, and this was when I was in Jamia, and she used to, she was a bit frail. This is like the last 10 years. She used to ask me to come and host these parties for her. And all her friends who would come, and they would all sit, and somebody would, they would all talk, and all she needed was me to be there to make sure everybody was taken care of, because it's not like she didn't have servants or anything, but she just felt that having somebody in the house who was part of the family, was a good experience. And all these ladies, no matter how ill they were, how, frail they were, they used to come to meet her. And they would all sit and they would talk, and they would exchange whatever information. It was with each of these ladies, she had an extremely close bond, that they would come and visit her whenever she kind of said she wanted to meet up, no matter what their physical condition was.
But Shahana, let's go, since you mentioned the last 10 years, let's talk about that moment in her life, because that was also for her the most intensely personal moment. A long moment, perhaps. She became more and more involved with Nurudeen Ahmed, and even though they tried to keep their relationship private, but the fact that he visited her every day for 25 years, the fact that they actually married after his wife passed away, and yet, despite that, they continued to live apart, respecting each other's spaces, all of these things, but she still somehow remained the other woman in the eyes of society. The legitimacy she kind of sought was never hers to claim. And even when he passed away, this kind of was more, so tragically evident. So talk a little bit about that part of her life.
Well, in the book, she kind of sums it up very nicely when she says that on the epitaph on his grave mentions everybody in the family, but not her. Okay. And she says, "Wo usi waqt mera, I was no more there, a part of his life." So she, I think, went through this, from what one has read in the book and understood from knowing her as a grandmother, she went through this relationship really like how what she calls, it was her destiny. It was just meant to happen, and she had to take whatever came her way. And he was also apparently an extremely strong man. So it's not like she could have, what am I trying to say here? She could have influenced him in any which way to give her more of a status than what she got. So she kind of made that little bit her own, that this is all I'm going to get from this relationship. It was very important for him that his children accepted him. So even when there's that bit in the book that he's really frail and old and he's ill and he needs to drive back every night, because it was important for him to be home every night. Even when he has his heart attack, she says, she called the son and says, let's take an appointment for him. It's not like she could have taken the appointment for him. I mean, as a wife, since she does mention in the book that they were married, she could have taken the appointment, but she doesn't. She never felt confident enough to make any claims on his time or his life. So she's happy also in a certain way, or not happy. She becomes content playing the other woman. She accepts that part and she takes it as what it is, instead of trying to change it or make it unpleasant or whatever.
So in many ways, this book's journey, such an interesting journey, and it's a journey through language, because she writes in a language that you don't read, but she finds a way to transfer that language to you. You find your way around it. And then there it is, her memoir now in English.
If I can say one thing here, Urvashi, the lady who was reading the book while I transcribed it, she is from a conservative sect of Muslims. And she turned around to me and she said, Shahana, your grandmother's story will be very inspirational for a lot of women, even today, because they have not been able to do what she did back then. They won't even have the courage to do it today because everybody is so scared of how society will perceive them. And for her to have done this in the 1940s, so I was like, okay, if this book can be a source of strength to somebody who can find that you don't have to constantly, if you leave your husband, you don't have to go back to your parents' home, that you can find inside you yes, a way to find a job or stand on your own 2 feet, find solutions for your children. They may not be the perfect solution. I am sure they were not perfect, and my father, my uncle went through, and she herself says they must have suffered in their own way. But yet she doesn't just take the security and comfort of and what the family was and what that life in Lucknow was also extremely comfortable.
Shahana, in closing, can I ask you to read that lovely passage at the end when after Noor passes away and she's waiting in the other room?
Sure. Somewhere in another part of the house, my Noor was sleeping eternally. A huge crowd had gathered there. Fakhruddin was also somewhere there. Later, I learnt it was Sultan Yar Khan who said, ask someone to bring Nuruddin's Begum Sahiba inside to see his face for the last time. The message was conveyed to Kamman. She held me in her arms and took me inside. The weight of my grief felt unbearable. I could hardly walk or see where I was going through the steady stream of tears. But Kamman kept holding me tight. I bent over the body of my beloved Noor and silently, in my heart, said goodbye to him for the last time. I could not see much, but I knew the room was packed with people. It felt as though the whole town had turned up for his funeral. The fact that our love was now being displayed publicly like this was killing me. For 25 long years, we had kept our feelings for each other private. With great dignity, we suppressed our sentiments and suffered quietly so that our love would not be misunderstood, so that it would not become a stigma, a source of entertainment for others. This is exactly what was happening today.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Shahana, very much for doing this. And I hope the book makes its way into the world as it deserves to.
Thank you, Urvashi. Thank you, JLF. And I'm so glad that you didn't give up on wanting to print this book despite those 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Urvashi and Shahana, for such a warm and intimate conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights into the art and craft of translation. And if you all enjoyed the session, please do let your friends know and share it on your social media pages. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Words Are Bridges. We promise to be back next week for another exciting session at Jaipur Literature Festival's Words Are Bridges. Good evening and thank you.